AITA, am I the asshole for not inviting my brother to my wedding after what he did? Throwaway because my family follows my main. I never thought I'd be the guy posting one of those long, messy Reddit threads. But here I am, because I don't have anyone else I can unload to without it turning into a family tribunal or 1,000 well-meaning but biased opinions. My name is Jason, I'm 28, and I got married last year. My wife is Emily, she's 27, and for the last 7 years she's been a partner in the truest sense, practical, soft, and stubbornly kind. We built most of our life together with our hands, we scraped for a down payment on a tiny house, split the renovations, and learned how to make each other laugh even when money was tight. The mess that pushed me here is about my older brother, Luis, 32, and something he did at our rehearsal dinner that set off a cascade of reactions. I chose to uninvite him. That decision didn't stay contained. It exploded into my parents choosing sides, group chats I was excluded from, a lot of ugly texts, and months of cold silence. There were apologies later, small reconciliations, and a slow rebuilding of a relationship with consequences I'll live with. I'll tell it all in chunks, like I posted updates over time, because that's how it happened. I'll try to be honest and keep my ego out of it. I'll also tell you when I was immature, when I was proud, and when I was just scared. This is long because the thing wasn't a single moment. It was a history that finally caught up. If you Google sibling rivalry, you won't find my family, but you'll find the shape of it, repeated patterns, unspoken comparisons, preferential treatment thinly wrapped in support. Luis was the kind of kid who made being the golden child look effortless. At 8 he scored a goal that my dad still calls the shot of the season. The neighborhood had a mini celebration. Dad built a contraption of plywood and string and hung streamers. They took pictures. For his 10th birthday he got the bike everyone wanted. For graduation he got a camera, so he can be creative, my mom said. I watched the way they lit up for him. I'm not trying to make this into a tragedy of victimhood, our childhoods were fine in many ways. We ate dinners together, my mom made lasagna every Sunday, and there were good memories. But there were also countless little fractures that stacked up, the way mom would text a photo of Luis's soccer medal with 3 heart emojis, while my A in calculus merited, good job, and nothing else. When college bills came, they helped him. For me, you can do loans, was the practical advice. We didn't talk about it. That was the rule. Complaining felt disloyal. So I learned to swallow a small, steady ache. I got used to pretending I didn't notice favoritism. It became background noise, white noise that I barely registered until it got loud. Fast forward to adulthood, I have a job that mostly pays the bills, a house that creaks in winter, and a partner who sees me. When Emily and I got engaged, I did everything I could on my own because, by then, it felt normal. My parents congratulated us, texted gifts, and came by for coffee. They were happy, I never doubted that. But there was always a small sense that our milestones were not as celebrated as his. Not loudly, not ceremoniously. I could have tried harder to demand attention. For a while I accepted it. Part of me had convinced myself that the quiet satisfaction of doing things ourselves was noble. But deep down the old ache was still there, a quiet ledger comparing what his life had cost the family and what mine had cost me. Emily is the other lens through which I finally learned to see the problem. She didn't grow up here, her family was different, less performative, more procedural. She noticed things I didn't because she was outside the pattern. She asked questions that landed like stones in a still pond. When we started planning the wedding we had the usual small wars, budgeting fights, dress fittings that felt like mini acquisitions, a spreadsheet that ruled our lives. But the rehearsal dinner was meant to be small and kind, our close friends, parents, and maybe a few cousins. We wanted something intimate. We wanted to taste everything. Simple. Wedding planning exposed invisible pressures. My parents asked about guest lists, then asked again. Are you sure we can't invite more people, they'd say. Luis, living a little further away with Sophia, was involved in the chatter but not much, until one night he wasn't. The first time Luis hinted at doing something at the wedding, it felt like a joke, the sort of brotherly teasing you roll your eyes at. At my parents' house, during an otherwise sweet dinner where Emily and I spilled our choice of first dance song, Luis said it like an afterthought. "By the way, Sophia and I have a big announcement to make at the wedding." He said it with the same easy smirk he's always had. The room didn't fall into silence, people laughed, made the usual, noises. I laughed too. I thought, he's being extra, that was the thought, a small, dismissible annoyance. But it was the way he said it, the calm certainty, the presumption. He expected us to share a day with his moment. That assumption landed wrong and it lingered. It lodged in me like a splinter. That night, in the car, Emily said quietly, "He's going to do something." I told her she was imagining things. I lied because I wanted to be the man who could shrug off family noise and still enjoy the evening. But I remember watching Luis's face as he ate, the weird little pride, the way he sat back, like he owned a stage. A rehearsal dinner is supposed to be silly and small and a preview of everyone's bad dance moves. Ours was that, until it wasn't. We had set up long rectangular tables in our open-plan kitchen/dining room. Twinkle lights were looped around a beam Emily had insisted on. The caterer came and explained the sauce consistency to me like I was supposed to make a decision about a minor international crisis. My mother fussed with napkins. Luis showed up with something that should have been a joke, a padded case with a zipper, a projector, for later, he said, and smiled in that way that closes down conversation. We ate for a while. There were toasts, short, messy, honest. My best friend from college told an embarrassing story about me trying to impress Emily by juggling apples. She laughed, I flushed. Everything was fine until Luis stood up. He asked for attention in the gentlest of ways, no shouting, no dramatic reveal, just the flip of a switch. He dimmed the lights. The projector hummed. A video played across the wall, vacation clips, photos of Luis and Sophia, a montage that had obviously taken time. They cut it with music that hit exactly the sentimental notes they intended. At the end the title card read, "Baby Miller, February 2025. The applause was immediate and honest. People cried. My mother covered her face and sobbed in the best kind of joy, the ones you see in commercial ads. My father's hands were on Luis's shoulders like he'd just built a cathedral. Sophia was radiant. I remember looking at Emily. Her face was the sort of blank that means the mind is recalibrating. She mouthed, "Our night." The table spun around me and I felt it, a small, cold island of anger. People were crying over his news, and we had just been eaten by it. After the applause and the hugs the room dissolved into chatter, people leaning in to envelope them in congratulations. I walked into the driveway to cool down. Luis joined me, not because we were heading anywhere, but because this is the only place we ever had actual conversations, outside the ritual. "What the hell, Luis?" I asked, the words harsher than I intended. He shrugged like it was nothing. "Relax, man. Everyone's happy. Don't be so dramatic." I said, out loud, "That was our night. You didn't even ask." He smiled like he was hearing a joke. "Dude, it's a baby. People celebrate babies. Don't be jealous." I told him then, probably clumsily, that if he pulled anything like that on the wedding night, he wouldn't be invited. He laughed. "Good luck telling Mom and Dad that." That laugh, light, confident, was the sound of a man who had never had his day snatched from him. It lowered me. Inside, Emily sat with her hands around her glass. When she saw me come back she got up and we steered away from the house to the little grass strip by the curb. She asked very calmly, "Are you going to let this ruin everything?" I wanted to be bigger than it. For a moment I pictured myself swallowing it and moving on, making the day about us no matter what. But there was a piece of me, an accumulation of quieter moments, that recognized this for what it was, one more example that my life would be background music to Luis's highlights if I let it. So I made a choice I thought was fair. I told Luis he was not invited if he tried to hijack the wedding. That choice carried consequences I underestimated. Update 1. I sent Luis a short message the next morning, no venom, just bluntness. Me, after last night, we need to talk. I don't want you at the wedding if you're planning to make it about you. Luis, reply Mom's gonna love this. You're hilarious. Half an hour later my phone blew up. My mom was on the line, she screamed and then cried. My dad left a message saying he couldn't believe I would treat family like this. Luis posted an obtuse status on Facebook, something about family, sharing the spotlight, be grown. Relatives I rarely speak to messaged me with little arrows of judgment, don't be harsh, Jay, it's a baby. Family first. Apologize, please. Emily cried. Not the theatrical cry of someone watching a feel-good montage, this was a tired, raw, private cry. She hugged me and said, maybe it's easier to let it happen. Who does this hurt, really? That night I lay awake thinking about all the quiet things I'd never voiced. The childhood frictions. The well-intentioned but misaligned priorities. I also thought of how little this had to do with the baby specifically. The baby is a joyful thing. I did not want to take that away. What I did want was a day that literally belonged to the two people getting married, and not to someone else's announcement. That is a small and specific request, I kept telling myself. But the family turned it into a test of loyalty. That's when it started. The first update to strangers online, the mixture of defensive calls, and a slow creep of people picking sides. Up until then, the worst-case scenarios were theoretical. Now they were in text messages, in group chats, and in the faces of people who used to call me, my son, in a tone I'd always thought affectionate but now tasted like temperature checks. Within 2 days of the post, a family group chat appeared titled, Real Family Only, yes, that's what they named it. My cousin, bless his oversharing heart, sent me screenshots. I wasn't in the chat. They'd created a space where they could remark on our drama without me in the room. Messages scrolled like a small parade of disappointment. Mom, I don't even want to go if Luis isn't welcome. Dad, Jason is being dramatic. This is his family. We should support him. I'm still not sure whether Dad meant support Luis or support the family unity. Luis, whatever. It'll be a boring wedding without us. We'll miss the cake. People said, we, and our, like the wedding was an event they were owed. That exclusion stung on a level I couldn't easily explain. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the speed with which the line between family and me was drawn. Emily suggested we block the chat notifications and stop checking them. For a while, that helped. But the world has a habit of leaking through. Invitations are a social currency. Missing someone's message is the modern equivalent of not being seen at a table. I felt cut out, and because I hadn't screamed or thrown a plate, no one believed how wounded I was. We were suddenly the wardens of a minor civil war no one could remember starting. At night I replayed the rehearsed dinner in my head. I could remember the exact grain of the video, the way the light on the wall made everyone's faces soft. I could remember the way people leaned forward to watch the title card. I could also remember how Luis walked back into the dining room with his chin up, as if claiming territory. That small movement was the spark that lit something inside me which, honestly, had been flammable for years. About a week after the group chat, my parents came over unannounced. They'd always been the kind to drop by with pies and lopsided casseroles, but this time there was an edge to their faces. Mom sat down and used the kind of voice that compresses years of disappointment into a single sentence, re-invite Luis, or we won't come. It was such a simple line, and yet everything about it was a weapon. It was that ultimatum that turned the problem from, do we want him here, into, will our parents attend our wedding? Suddenly it was not just about pride, not just about principle. It was about whether our ceremony would be the family event my mother had expected since I was 5 and brought home a solemn drawing of a dog. I asked them the obvious question. Would you do this if the roles were reversed? Dad scoffed and said, Luis would never do this to you. The "would never" felt like a small historical erasure. It dismissed patterns I'd struggled with. It dismissed the fact that Luis had, in fact, referred to our wedding as a place to make his announcement in a way that assumed complicity. I told them then, maybe too loudly, that if they wanted to support him over me, they could not be there. My voice sounded small in the kitchen. Emily squeezed my hand. They left that day more hurt than I felt victorious. I expected some immediate consequences, recriminations, names taken off the cake list, gossip. Instead we got silence. A thick, angry quiet that, after the initial heat, simply became a vacuum. My parents stopped calling as often. They called once to check on logistics for their travel. They sent a plate of lasagna one Thursday with a note, "We love you." The note didn't land. It felt like a lazy stitch on a torn seam. At night, sleep was a thin thing. I felt like a kid again, hearing the muffled laughter of my parents downstairs in a house that suddenly felt too small for reconciliation. We chose a late fall date because the leaves would be a burnt orange that matched the invitations. The planner did her magic. Emily's dress was lace that caught light like small fish scales. The ceremony was in a small stone chapel that smelled like old wood and candle wax. Close friends sat in the front rows, some colleagues and cousins filled the seats further back. We had deliberately filled the guest list with people who, to us, mattered. Luis did not show. Neither did my parents. In the parking lot I felt a kind of surreal peace. There is something about standing at the front of a congregation, about the gravity of the moment, that strips most petty resentments down to a pure shape. Everyone waited breathless as Emily walked toward me. She looked better than in any photo we'd ever taken. The organ hummed. Someone in the back hiccuped. When it came to my vows I forgot half of them. I remember saying, I promise to make you coffee, to do the dishes when it's midnight, to hold your hand even when the house is on fire, and those felt true. The guests laughed in the right places. I did not think about who wasn't there. I thought about the thousand small, kind things Emily had done in our years together, about how she had sat with me on shaded porches while I did the accounting for our small household and how she had texted me a photo of a lunch she'd made because she wanted to make sure I ate that day. At the reception we danced, we ate, we toasted. People who had been supportive showed up in full. My friends from college were there with ties not quite straight and eyes tender. People who had been on the fence came because they love us enough to set aside family politics. It felt like a circle forming. After the cake cutting someone finally asked the question we had all been expecting. Do you regret anything? I said, truthfully, yes, my family's not here, and that hurts. I didn't say that I didn't regret the decision that led here because I believed it was necessary for our boundaries. The applause was immediate and kind because people love the idea of boundaries in theory, and love even more the idea of someone finally exercising them with conviction. For the rest of the night I felt buoyant. I felt like we had forged a new version of family, one that included the people who had chosen to prioritize us. That was thin comfort, but it was real. The silence that followed the wedding was thick. Cards arrived from acquaintances. My parents sent a formal note, printed, apologizing for any misunderstanding and saying they loved us. I read it and put it down. An email from my aunt suggested a reconciliation dinner if I would only be the one to start. The subtext being, apologize. Then Sophia had the baby. She went into labor early. My mother texted me one line, your nephew is here. No photo. No name. No invitation. A passive message aimed at informing rather than embracing. That small absence hurt more than anything. It was a reminder that while my decision had preserved our wedding day, it had created a crack that some family members chose to widen rather than bridge. Months passed. Luis called eventually. His voice was softer than the last time I'd heard it. There was no smugness. No performance. He said, simply, "I'm sorry. I didn't think about how much that would hurt you." We spoke for an hour. He told me about the stresses of unexpected fatherhood, their small apartment's chaos, and a kind of sudden humility that had crept into him. I answered honestly. We did not repair everything with that call, but it was a first true conversation in months. My parents remained estranged in the way broken things are, present at the edges, not in the center. Sometimes they would send messages through other family members. Once, at Christmas, my mom texted me a photo of a cake with "Merry Christmas" scrawled in pink frosting. The message said, "We miss you, son." I stared at it for a long time. I thought of the lasagna and the framed pictures on their mantel and the way they had celebrated Luis in 1,000 little ways. One night Emily found me scrolling old photo albums, hazy images of our childhoods. She put the album down and sat very close. "You did the right thing," she said. Not everyone, not always, but in that moment she meant it. It's a heavy thing to have the woman you love not only stand by you but to become part of the boundary you hold. After the big fallout and the wedding, the world shifted in small, persistent ways. Update 2, me, 2 months later. We're coping. Luis called. He apologized. He's a dad now and it sounds like the universe humbled him in the best possible way. My parents are distant. Christmas was odd. Emily and I are okay. We had a quiet holiday. Met the baby last week in a little, humid hospital room. He's small and perfect. We left before it got awkward. Meeting my nephew was a strange mix of tenderness and mistrust. I felt an immediate protectiveness, like a man who has watched seasons of a show and knows the plot beats. I also felt a fierce gratitude for Emily, who sat by my side and squeezed my hand any time a thought of my parents flaring up felt like a small knife. We started couples therapy more as a maintenance check than a crisis mode, mostly because the stress had touched places we didn't want it to: money conversations, guest lists still unfinished, lingering guilt. In therapy we traced back to childhood and identified patterns. My therapist, a calm woman with a notebook that smelled faintly of paper, helped me give language to the quiet things: secondary mourning, familial triangulation, chronic comparison. Terms I had never used before but that somehow fit snugly around our experience, like a new coat. The most intimate and intense conversations often came at night after the dishes were cleared, after the laughter had thinned and the house settled. I want to be explicit about these scenes because people often imagine that Emily was either a saint or a passive victim. She was neither. She argued with me. She cried. She told me blunt truths I didn't want to hear. One night, 2 months after the wedding, we had what I now call the long talk. It started because she found a text from my mom in which my mother said, "You've changed since you started living on your own." Small things become triggers when they resonate with old wounds. We sat on the couch. The ceramic mug in her hands had a chip on the rim I'd never noticed before. She said, "Jason, sometimes I think you love the idea of being right more than you love being happy." I flinched. So what? I have to let people step on us to preserve peace? I'm not saying let people step on you. I'm saying pick which battle is worth burning bridges for. This feels like a war you could avoid. I answered that boundaries are not capitulation and that boundaries are how you teach people how to treat you. She asked whether my boundaries included being cruel to the people who raised me. The word cruel echoed, even she flinched after she said it. We argued for hours in the small language of marriages in long-term heat, the economy of blame, the logistics of apology, the way that anger can hide fear. In the morning, exhausted and closer, we made a plan. We would not rescind the uninvitation. We would not force reconciliation. We would, however, leave a door ajar for real apologies and honest conversations, not public gestures or guilt-driven notes but face-to-face humility. For a while that plan looked like nothing. For a while it looked like a nice idea on paper. But then Luis did call. And his apology felt real. Not in the performative way of a social media mea culpa, but in his vulnerability-stripped voice. "I didn't think about how it would make you feel," he said. In turn I had to own that when I told him he wasn't invited I was also calling in a history of things left unspoken. He listened. We spoke about the baby, about late-night feedings, about never being sure how to hold a small body that demanded everything. When we hung up, I felt the soft ache of things moving toward repair. Update 3, me, 4 months later Luis and I talk. Not every day, but the calls happen. He seems different, maybe fatherhood did that. He apologized. My parents remain in a holding pattern. Emily is tired but I see relief in her sometimes. The house feels like a home again. These updates were posted on Reddit like diary entries, not to drum up sympathy but to keep a record. People offered advice, sometimes harsh, sometimes wise. One comment that stuck. "You can miss the family you want, while loving the family you have." I clung to that for a while. It felt like permission to be both sad and grateful. Rebuilding from family fracture is less like stacking bricks and more like learning a new language. You have to invent grammar for the way you'll speak to each other. You decide when to laugh about old times and when to leave conversations alone. You also decide which rituals you keep and which you let go. I started seeing Luis in public places, beer and soccer sometimes, a quick coffee while his baby slept in a carrier. We'd talk about small things and avoid big ones for a while. We got honest about things childhood, how mom's way of celebrating him felt less like error and more like ethos. She genuinely loved that mode of expression. Dad confessed in a voicemail that they didn't realize how their acts of support for Luis read like leaving me behind. It would have been a small thing if an apology could stitch everything. But apologies, like fabric, sometimes come with different thread. One soft evening I took my nephew to the park while Luis wrestled with a stroller and a crying infant. I watched him and something in me relaxed. He, still loud at times, still a little performative, but also a man with a new center that was not his achievements. It softened my memory of the rehearsed dinner, not enough to erase but enough to frame as part of a complicated life story. My parents, though, have been slower. They will come to the periphery, a birthday party from a cousin, a holiday, a mutual friend's barbecue. When we meet, conversations are careful and polite. There's a lot of tiny testing: who sits where? Who initiates? Small kindnesses reappear, an extra helping of pie, a question about work, but the deep, mutual trust is slow to return. Meanwhile, Emily and I continued to build our marriage with little rituals that fortified us: Sunday night walks, a rotating date night jar, ridiculous inside jokes. We laughed a lot more than we argued. That balance made the hard bits bearable. Update 4, me, 6 months later we survived the wedding and the immediate fallout. Life has settled into a new rhythm. Luis is a father. We visit. My parents are distant but alive. Emily and I have a weird, beautiful household. If I could go back I might do some things differently, but I don't think I'd change the line I drew. The peace we have is worth the cost. I wish I could hand anyone reading this a simple map: here is the one decision that will save your family and your peace. There isn't one. There are trade-offs. The line I drew with Luis felt essential. It needed to be drawn. It also cut me. Boundaries, when enforced, do not only protect, they sometimes sever. In the quiet months after the fireworks, I learned a few things the hard way. 1. Boundaries are messy but necessary. The decision to exclude someone was a boundary. It wasn't cruel in intention, it was corrective. I realized that while boundaries can hurt the people you love, especially those who are used to getting the benefit of confusion, they also protect the vulnerable. Parts of your life that you have vowed to nurture. 2. People change for complicated reasons. Luis's apology felt honest because I saw a man changed by middle-of-the-night feedings and the slow, exhausting miracle of being responsible for another human. Some people grow into tenderness because they have to. It doesn't make their previous behavior harmless, but it means there is room to rebuild. 3. Family loyalty is not absolute. There are myths about unconditional loyalty that don't consider the cost of being the background actor in someone else's life. You can love people but refuse to let them define your moment. That choice will be labeled selfish and noble in equal measure, often by the same voices. 4. You can grieve the family you want while loving the one you have. I grieved the way things could have been, an uncomplicated, warm family that cheerfully celebrates every milestone. I also realized that my life is also full of chosen family, friends, Emily's parents, colleagues. People who stepped into roles my parents didn't want to grow into. 5. Marriage requires external defenses sometimes. Emily wasn't the reason for the fight, she was the reason to fight. She asked me to hold a line so we could have one day that belonged to us. That is a heavy ask, and it shapes the marriage over time. She kept me anchored to the idea that our union needed a space that wasn't bleeding into every other person's need for performance. Final update: 8 months after the wedding, Luis and I have a relationship that's quieter, less performative. We text. We meet. He's a good dad. My parents show up occasionally, their apologies are small and measured. Emily and I are stronger for it. We still feel the sting sometimes, holidays are tactical, but we have a marriage that feels like home. If someone asked me to do it again, I'm not sure I'd take the easy route. I'd hold that line. If you are in the middle of choosing between preserving a polished family photograph and protecting the small, private life you and your partner are trying to build, know that there is an honest cost to each choice. You will trade something, attendance, likability, holiday ease, for something else, dignity, calm, a day that is truly yours. People will tell you to pick love. People will tell you to pick peace. Some will tell you to pick silence. None of them have your exact ledger of wounds, loyalty, and history. You have to measure what will hurt less in the long run. Would I apologize to someone I loved for the sake of appearances? I'm not sure. I would have the conversation differently, maybe with more tenderness, perhaps with more preemptive attempts to explain the why. That said, I do not regret the identity of the day that Emily and I created. We traded a few strained relationships for a firm foundation. I'll live with that trade. If you have specific questions about how I handle texts, how to talk to parents who put their other child first, or about the therapy that saved our sleep schedule, I'll answer. I don't have a perfect moral. I have a messy one painted in the colors of choosing and loss. Thanks for reading, if you made it this far. I know this is a long post. The family drama didn't resolve in a single scene, and it won't for most people. If anything, maybe what this story offers is a permission slip to consider the cost of every costume you and your family wear, and to decide which one you'll take off. Jason.